Hi everyone. It has been a few weeks since I've done this, and I am sorry for that. Hopefully, get back into the routine now of recording my drasha from DNG Shabbos morning, sometime after Shabbos, so that those of you who are not able to join us in shul for davening and for the drasha are still able to join us afterwards virtually. It's been good to see so many of you in shul recently. And of course, we certainly miss all of you who are still not able to or not comfortable to yet attend. I'm recording this on Tuesday, November 3rd. Most importantly, my son Avi's first birthday. But also, you may have heard that today is the election. There's a presidential election going on. If you haven't gone out to vote, you have a couple hours left to do so. Go out and vote. And I was thinking before Shabbos, and I really told myself that I was not going to address the election in my drasha on Shabbos, even though it is important sometimes from the pulpit to talk about things that are happening in the world, and especially important things and things that are on people's minds. But I've stuck to a pretty firm rule during my years in the rabbinate of not discussing politics. The separation of shul and politics is an important one that, although sometimes I've been tempted or urged to go against, I've pretty much stuck to it, and I have no intention of changing that. So I opened up the parsha. It was Parshas Lecha, and I was reviewing the psukim, and I got up to the story of the dispute and the conflict between Lot and Avraham, or more accurately, Lot's shepherds and Avraham's shepherds. And at the end of the story, Avraham tells Lot that they should separate and each go their own ways. And Avraham says, it's Perek Yud Gimel, Pasuk Tes, Ima Smol ve'imina ve'ima yamin ve'as me'ila. If you go to the left, I'll go to the right. And if you go to the right, I'll go to the left. And jumping out of the parsha there, right at me, was a reminder that this is the week where we have to decide whether we're going to the left or to the right. Everyone has to choose for themselves. So I kind of took it as a message of, you know what, maybe instead of avoiding the election, we should just embrace it, at least for this week, and look for a message in the parsha that can tell us something about how we can handle ourselves and how we should approach this day and this week, which is certainly just something. There's a different feel. There's, something's happening that many people have or will have perhaps a strong reaction to one way or the other. It's important for us to prepare ourselves as to how we want to experience this moment. I actually want to go back to that story. And one of the advantages of giving a drasha on Tuesday, for Shabbos, is I get to drink coffee in the middle. I want to go back to that story of the dispute between Lot and Avram. Read a few psukim that describe what's happening, and I think there's a very important message for all of us, not just this week, but throughout our lives. The Torah describes that there is a Vayihi Riv, Bein Ro'ei Miknei Avram, Uvein Ro'ei Miknei Lot. There was, as I mentioned, a dispute between the shepherds of Avram and the shepherds of Lot. The Canaanites and the Perizzites were then sitting in the land. Rashi explains to us that the dispute revolved around where their sheep were allowed to eat from. Avram's shepherds were very careful about not allowing their sheep to graze from any land that they didn't certainly own. He didn't want to risk potentially stealing somebody else's grass, eating from something that didn't belong to them. Lot's shepherds were a little bit more easygoing, or a little bit more lax about this issue, and they allowed their sheep to graze around from wherever. And Avram's shepherd said to them, what are you doing? You're stealing other people's grass. You can't let your sheep eat just from anywhere. And Lot said to them, well, the truth is, he did have a response. He said, one day I'm going to inherit Avram's wealth. Because Avram's going to inherit the land of Israel. Hashem has just promised it to him. And Avram doesn't have any children, at least at this point in his life. Lot, I'm his nephew. I'm going to inherit the whole land of Eretz Canaan, the whole land of Eretz Israel. This is all going to be mine one day. And therefore, what's wrong with letting my sheep graze from it? And Avram's shepherds responded, well, even if that's true, let's assume maybe that's a possibility one day, but you don't own it right now. That's why the pasuk concludes by saying, there are other people living here right now. Even if one day you'll inherit it, even if one day it'll be yours, it's not now, you can't steal. So we have this dispute between the shepherds of Avram and the shepherds of Lot, and I'm assuming that it caused problems. They're trying to work together, and they're trying to spend time together, and they're constantly bickering about where their sheep are allowed to eat. For shepherds, that's a big deal. So Avram says to Lot in the next pasuk, Vayomer Avraham and Lot, Al nasihi miriva beini uveinecha. Let there not be a quarreling, a strife between me and you. Uvein ro'ai uvein ro'echa, between my shepherds and your shepherds. We are, after all, we're brothers. Let's not fight about this. And therefore, he concludes and says, Haloch al ha'aretz lefanecha, the whole land is here before you. He pared nemay alai, separate from me. Ima smol ve'imina, as I mentioned before, if you go left, I will go to the right. V'im hayamin ve'as me'ilan, if you go to the right, I'll go to the left. Maybe we shouldn't be so close together anymore because this fight isn't going well. I had two questions when I read these psukim. You know, this might seem like semantics, but when reading the Torah closely, it's important to notice each and every word, really each and every letter. And that the dispute between Lot and Avram, as described by the Torah, is Vayihi Riv, Reish Yod Vet. It was, the Art Scroll describes it as there was quarreling. When Avram then approaches Lot and says he's not happy about what's going on, Avram says, Al natihi miriva, which again the Art Scroll translates as strife. What's the difference between strife and quarreling? I don't know. The Art Scroll translators were just looking for a way to distinguish between two words that basically seem to mean the same thing, but they're actually different words. Riv and miriva. Riv is even in the word miriva. Clearly they have the same root. They have the same source. But why does Avram, after the Torah describes it as a riv, there is a riv between the shepherds of Avram and the shepherds of Lot? Why does Avram say to Lot, Al nasihi miriva? Let there not be a miriva. Who said anything about a miriva? This has only been described as a riv. So what is the difference between a riv and a miriva? And why is that significant here? By the way, again, if you want the reference in the psukim, it's Bereshis Parshas Lech Lecha Perek Yud Gimel, psukim Zayin, Ches, and Tes, chapter 13, psukim 7, 8, and 9. Question number 2. The dispute, the conflict, is described as one that is between Roei Miknei Avram and Roei Miknei Lot, the shepherds of the flocks of Avram and the shepherds of the flocks of Lot. Fine. That's what the fight was. Those were the subjects of the fight. Those are the people who weren't getting along. And yet Avram says to Lot, Al nasihi miriva beini uveinecha, between me and between you, uvein ro'ai uvein ro'echa, and between my shepherds and between your shepherds. Who said anything about a fight between me and you, between Avram and Lot? They seem to be getting along very well. There was a dispute between their shepherds. Why does Avram not throw in beini uveinecha, between me and between you? And even if you want to just say, you know what, well, if my shepherds are fighting with your shepherds, and I'm in charge of my shepherds, and you're in charge of your shepherds, so presumably the dispute worked its way up, and really, ultimately, it is a dispute between me and you, because our employees are fighting with each other. But still, then it could have said, beini uvein ro'ai, between me and my shepherds versus you and your shepherds. It almost sounds like Avram is making a distinction and emphasizing that this is not just a fight between my shepherds and your shepherds, but between me and you, and my shepherds and your shepherds. He even puts beini uveinecha, me and you, first, before my shepherds and your shepherds, even though the fight really originated between my shepherds and your shepherds. Again, what is the difference between Riv and Miriva? Why does Avram change from the Torah's word of Riv to his word of Miriva? And why does Avram add that this isn't just a fight between your shepherds and my shepherds, but it's actually between me and you, and my shepherds and your shepherds? So, a bunch of the Mefarshim actually note this difference between the words Riv and Miriva. The Ksav, Kabbalah, the Malbim, each have their own approaches that I found interesting. Maybe we'll share on another occasion. But the one I want to focus on for today, that I found particularly meaningful and that really gave a whole new insight into this section of the Torah, is from the commentary of the Alshich. I actually found it in Rabbi Shalom Rosner's book Shalom Rav, his relatively new book, English, Divrei Torah on the Parsha, a beautiful sefer. I'm going to read you one paragraph from what he writes, because he writes it better than I could say it in my own words. The Alshich explains that whenever we get into an argument with someone else, there is a cause or a reason for the argument. It may not be a good reason, or I'll add, it may be a very good reason. Sometimes there are good reasons to disagree or to even argue, or maybe even to fight. Sometimes there are important things to discuss. But there's something upon which to place the blame. There is an issue that we're fighting about. Once the argument starts, however, it is often blown out of proportion, and both sides start adding fuel, throwing in details and events that occurred in the past that have nothing to do with the argument at hand. The argument starts out as a little thing, but then both sides keep adding more and more, and it blossoms in a terrible way until both parties are suddenly arguing about anything and everything. That's what Avraham was saying to Lot. Right now it is a riv. A riv, according to the Al-Shech, is a small dispute between our shepherds. A riv is when you're arguing about a particular issue. When you're debating something, some specific issue. Let's do what we can now to prevent having this dispute snowball into something much larger. The Al-Shech explains that a riv is an argument centered around a particular issue. Everybody has those, and that's okay. A meriva is what happens sometimes, all too often, after a riv, which is instead of debating a specific issue, it snowballs into something much bigger and much worse, and you start bringing in ideas from the past. You can even forget what you're actually were arguing about in the first place, and it becomes just a fight between the people themselves. We all know this, sadly. We've all been through it a million times, whether it's parents and their children, spouses with each other, friends. We've all been in some type of argument or fight about something. You know, imagine two spouses arguing. Could be about something as significant about how to spend a large amount of money. Could be about something as insignificant as cleaning the kitchen counter or what shelves you're going to put something in the fridge. But there's an argument. Okay, when you live together, when you have a close relationship with someone, when you're human beings, you're going to tend to argue sometimes and disagree. And that's okay, but it's very hard to keep it there. And sometimes, all too quickly, the riv, the conflict or the dispute about a particular issue becomes a meriva, which means we lose control and it begins to just be a fight. It doesn't even matter what it's about anymore. It's not about anything anymore. And it's just two people digging in their heels to win the fight, and it's terrible. And it could be tragic. By the way, the word meriva might remind us of a famous story, Parshas Chukas, the story of Meriva. That's where Moshe committed his sin that didn't allow him to go into Eretz Yisrael. What happened was the Jewish people were thirsty, and they wanted water, so they came to Moshe to complain. And Moshe was told by Hashem to speak to the rock. Symbolically, perhaps Moshe was told to use his words to deal with this, to discuss, to debate, to talk it out with them. And instead, Moshe hit the rock. Moshe hit the rock. Now, is it Bnei Israel's fault that they're complaining so much and they're always saying they're thirsty and nothing's ever enough? Was it Moshe's fault that he became impatient and lost control and ended up lashing out? Perhaps it was a mix of both. But we do see from that story something that could have or should have been a riv, should have just been a dispute or a disagreement. We're thirsty, we want water, this, that, and they could have talked it out and worked through their issues. Instead, all too quickly became a meriva. Became just a fight with yelling and complaining and even hitting. And that was a tragic end to Moshe's opportunity of entering the land of Israel. What was a riv became a meriva, and we remember that place as meriva. And true, Moshe hit the rock, and God forbid any of us should have to ever experience something that involves hitting. But I think we all know very well that you can hit without hitting. You can hit with your words too. Sometimes when you're in a fight, the way you speak can be almost as painful as God forbid something like hitting. That's why Avraham notes, he says to Lot, right now this is a riv, but al nasihi miriva. Let's be very careful. I see where this is going, and I don't like it. This riv is very quickly going to snowball into a miriva, and that is not where we want to go. And that's also why Avraham said, this might have started off as a dispute between my shepherds and your shepherds about what we're entitled to and what is moral and what's honest. And that's a very fair argument. And by the way, who's right in this argument? I think we'd all, if we're all honest, we know Avraham is right. I mean, he's Avraham Avinu. He's right. His argument is better, and he's Avraham. Presumably he was right, and presumably he knew very well he was right, and he knew Lot was being dishonest and was stealing. Yet, Avraham had the foresight to say, just because I'm right and he's wrong doesn't mean that I need to keep convincing and keep arguing with him and keep trying to encourage and force him to see and persuade him to see my side. If we don't deal with this smartly and respectfully quickly, this riv is going to become a meriva, and it's going to be not just between my shepherds and his shepherds. It's going to be beini uvencha. Very quickly, it's going to become personal, it's going to become damaging and destructive to our relationship altogether. Avraham said, you know what? Let's give each other some space. Let's respect each other's differences. You go to one side, I won't watch, I won't judge what you're doing. I'm going to go to the other side. You won't watch and see what I'm doing. And we'll agree to disagree. And we'll respect each other's space. And that way we will salvage our relationship. Now that itself would be, a nice message and a nice ending to the story, but I think the best part is what happens next. Because Avraham says, Ima smol ve'emina. If you choose to go to the left, I will go to the right. Ve'im hayamin ve'asmi'ila. And if you go to the right, I will go to the left. Now, I used to understand this. I thought, simply reading the pasuk, it sounds like Avraham is saying to Lot, if you go this side, I'll go all the way to the other side. And if you go that way, I'll go all the way that way. If you go to the left, I'll go all the way to the right. We'll be as far away as possible from each other. We'll never see each other. We'll never speak to each other again. Maybe we'll send each other a birthday card, and that's it. But if we never see each other, we won't fight, and that'll be fine. Rashi says that's not at all what is going on here. Avraham wasn't sending his nephew to the other side of the world, never to be seen again. This is what Avraham was saying. Ima smol ve'emina, if you go to the left, I'll go to the right. B'chol asher teshev, wherever you choose to dwell, wherever you choose to live, lo esrachek mimecha, I will not be far away. Ve'emod lecha lemagain ule'ezer, I'll be right next to you, ready to protect you and to help you. Some of the Mefarshim point out that there's a phrase in Tanakh, Omeid limino, standing right by his right side. That's what Avraham was saying to Lot. If you go to the right, I'm going to stand just immediately to your left. I'll give you some space. I'll respect your opinion about your sheep's grazing, but I'll be right there next to you, ready to help. If you go to the left, I'll stand by your right, but I'll stand right there by your right. Not on the opposite side of the world, but right next to you, ready to help. What's the proof that we know Avraham is standing right next to Lot, ready to help? Well, that's the very next story that we read about. The next thing that happens in the parsha, at the beginning of Parak Yud is there's a fight that breaks out, a real fight, a war between the 4 kings and the 5 kings, and Lot is taken captive, and a messenger is sent to Avraham, and without any hesitation, Avraham is right there, ready to put his life on the line, ready to save Lot. Avraham didn't say the only way that we could have a relationship is by not having a relationship, and by living on opposite ends of the world. Avraham said, listen, we need a little bit of space, we need to be able to respect each other's disagreement. We need to be able to agree to disagree, but that doesn't affect the fact that anashim achim anachnu, that we're brothers, and I will be there right with you along the way. And it's sad, current events today and the election, and really it's not just the election, but it's so much in the world, starts out as a riv, just a disagreement about a particular issue, and that's fine. That's healthy. That's important, actually, in society, and sometimes even in a relationship or in a family. But all too often, the riv becomes a meriva, where it becomes personal and it becomes just a fight about who's right and who's wrong and who's better and who's worse, and really could be terrible. Thank God, Baruch Hashem, one of the reasons I'm very happy to be part of the D&G community is, I don't see everything that happens, but at least from what I've experienced, Baruch Hashem, I don't think we've let political differences or differences of opinion of any sort become more important than our priorities, which are shalom and achdus and chesed and loving each other and being there for each other, which should always be more important than anything that we might disagree about. But the truth is that doesn't happen automatically. That's something that we have to remind ourselves of and strengthen and talk about every now and then, because it's not something that should be taken for granted. And sadly, it's not true in every Jewish community or in every shul or even in every family. Relationships have been broken about silly or even not such silly things, but nothing really that should be more important than family or the community or than being there for each other. Avraham Avinu taught us 3,000 years ago how it's done. When you get into an argument or when you see that you disagree with somebody, be careful and make sure, have the foresight to take whatever precautions you need to make sure that this riv doesn't become a meriva, because something starts out as a localized one-issue dispute, and God forbid it should ever become a personal attack that can destroy a friendship or a relationship. We give some healthy separation. We allow each other to live our own way. We respect each other's differences and divergent opinions, but perhaps most importantly, hasmol ve'imina v'em hayamin va'asmi'ila, like Rashi teaches us, I will be there right next to you. And the minute you need me, anashim achim anachnu, we are, in fact, all brothers, and nothing should ever get in the way of that. Have a wonderful day. Have a wonderful night. And when all is said and done with the presidential election in 2020, the most important thing is that we stick together. Take care. Have a great day.